Welcome to Dare to be Legendary, a podcast brought to you by Diversa Partners. In this podcast, we'll be sitting down with some of the brightest minds in tech, the founders, the visionaries, the entrepreneurs, the executives, that all have one thing in common. They are the leaders of today that are entirely transforming the technology ecosystem as we know it. In each episode, our guests will share their journey, vision, and market expertise with us. They are the ones who dare to be legendary.
I am incredibly excited to be hosting Maëlle Gavet, the talented and highly regarded CEO of Techstars. As most of you know, Techstars is the global platform for investment and innovation that has graduated nearly 2,800 companies, which in turn have raised over $19 billion and reached a combined market cap of over $54 billion. Welcome, Maëlle.
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Maëlle's story is a fascinating one. She has been a founder, spent 6 years with Boston Consulting Group, became CEO of Ozone, Russia's largest e-commerce site, was EVP of operations at what is today Booking Holdings. She was COO of the real estate platform Compass, which is now a $3.3 billion publicly traded company. She was named a young global leader by the World Economic Forum, one of Fortune's 40 under 40, one of the most creative people in business by Fast Company, and was fifth among Time Magazine's list of the top 25 female tech entrepreneurs. Now she has added best-selling author to the list with the release of Trampled by Unicorns, Big Tech's Empathy Problem and How to Fix It. That was published by Wiley and is now available. You have one of the most interesting journeys of any executive that I've known. In Fast Company, they wrote an article in 2012 where you're called the Jeff Bezos of Russia. And as I read that article, it honestly felt like a treatment of a prestige TV show. Tell me a little bit about building Ozone, the Internet of Russia, as a young French female executive in a world of oligarchs.
Yeah, I remember that article. It did feel a little bit like a TV show. I even took the journalist, they sent a journalist all the way to Moscow to spend a few days with me. And we went to a Russian nightclub together. And I think the guy just didn't know what to do. It was just so overwhelming for him. So yeah, good memories. I ended up at Ozone because I did a project for them when I was at the Boston Consulting Group. And this was really my very first encounter with e-commerce and with truly entrepreneurial companies, because BCG tends to work with much more established businesses. And I fell in love with it. It was just like, oh my God, like this is a booming business. This is very entrepreneurial. There is so much good that can come out of this type of business. I just want to try. And frankly, I speak Russian, so that probably helps. But frankly, being young and French and a woman was an advantage more than anything.
Why is that?
Because I was this really weird, unique person in the room. Like I was usually the only foreigner. I was almost always the youngest one. I learned Russian at school, so I was able to interact with everybody in the room in their own language. And I was just this completely out of the box, unusual person. And so because of that, I could get away with a lot of things. If anything, sometimes just by, looking at them smiling and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And so it was fascinating to me to see how much I would enter negotiations and people will clearly discount anything I had to say. And then by the end of the meeting, I had won the negotiation, got everything I wanted and more. And people were still looking at me like, oh, she's so nice. So it was great.
That's an amazing talent. How hard, when you built that business and went through all the challenges that you had to face, was it to finally get the top tier investment from Index in a company, if I read correctly, delivery drivers needed to be anonymous, a business where 80% of the cash was handed over to those drivers when the packages were delivered?
Yeah, at the time, the credit card system in Russia wasn't really developed. It has obviously changed tremendously over the last 10 years. But at the time, it was indeed 80% cash on delivery, which, as I'm sure you understand, created a lot of logistic complication. So Index was already a shareholder when I joined. As investor, especially in Europe, because Index is Europe-based, at least at the beginning, I have found them to be pretty eager to think outside the box and back founders and businesses that other investors would traditionally stay away from. And Ozone was that. It was just like this, when they went into Ozone's capital, Ozone was a small company. And people were like, why you're going to invest in Russia, in a tiny startup whose business model hasn't yet been proven? So I give them a tremendous amount of credit for seeing that ahead of everyone else. When I became CEO, what was interesting was, one, convincing them to continue to invest in the company, because we did 2 other fundraisings, one for $100 million and one for $150 million, which by today's standards look like nothing. But at the time, these were the largest fundraising in Europe ever done for tech. And so there was that. And then there was convincing all the others, because we got a bunch of other Western and Asian shareholder coming on board. Rakuten was one of them. And so I think the focus was, and by the way, it still works for pretty much any founder I meet with these days, is talk to them about the market potential. Talk to them about what makes the market different and exceptional. Talk about why is your strategy different, and equally importantly, talk about execution. And I have a strategic background because of the 6 years I spent at BCG, so I'm capable of handling like big concept. But I'm an operator. I was a founder 3 times. I built company from scratch. And I had, even at BCG, I had spent a lot of time doing very operational projects. And so when I would enter the room and talk to investors, again, be Index for them to do full-on investment, or new investors, I would talk to them about the big vision and about how amazing the Russian market was. And then I would go into how we're going to make that happen, because it felt like dreaming was good. Helping them how the dream would become a reality was better. And I had the credential to explain that.
Fantastic. You accomplished so much and raised a significant amount of cash, built a really sizable business there, and certainly had a ton of successes at Ozone. What made you decide to leave and join what was then Priceline Group, moving from an HQ in Moscow to an HQ in Connecticut?
So the truth is, I had been at Ozone for 5 years, and I don't know if you remember, but that was the whole Crimea debacle at the time. So Russia invaded Crimea, ended up annexing it. Then they invaded Eastern Ukraine. The West started putting some sanctions, which led to the ruble going, I think it was 28 rubles to the dollar before this whole Ukraine situation, and it went to $80 rubles to the dollar. And as you can imagine, Ozone, as an e-commerce company, would buy in dollar and sell in rubles. And so obviously there were some pretty challenging situation there. But more importantly, because I would have gone through the crisis, we had already managed a couple of crises before. So I was like, okay, that's fine. But more importantly, we were getting ready for an IPO. Actually, when the crisis happened, I was in the US doing a soft pre-IPO roadshow. And it became very, very clear, very, very fast that there will be no IPO whatsoever of any Russian company anytime soon following this whole thing. And so I went back home and I talked to the board. I talked to my family, and I was like, there's not going to be an IPO for another 5 years. I've already given 5 years of my life to Ozone and to Russia. Do I want to stay in Russia for another 5? And the answer on the personal front was absolutely not. I had recruited a COO at the time, which was a really good successor. And so the conversation with the board was really around like, hey, we've just had close to $150 million fundraising in dollars, which in the climate at the time was a blessing. So we had money in the bank. The company was performing well. I had a clear successor. And on the personal and professional side, it was very clearly time to go, because 5 more years on my resume in Russia would have been a problem professionally, honestly speaking. So that was it. That's what happened. And so I started looking around at what would be interesting. And a headhunter called me about Priceline, and I wanted to understand what it is to run a big public company. And I wanted to learn from one of the most successful tech company out there. And the role was amazing because it was overseeing all of operations for the entire group, which at the time was already a $60 or $70 billion market cap company that owned Booking.com, OpenTable, Kayak. It was just an amazing job. And that's why I decided to move.
So your experience previous to that, you had truly global experience. Did you find that your leadership style that might have been shaped by your time in Moscow and Ozone needed to be reshaped when you came back to the US?
I mean, yes and no. So I don't know if that's the answer you wanted. It wasn't just Ozone because I worked in so many different countries. When I was at BCG, I would relocate every time rather than go back and forth between France and the country I was working in. So I actually worked in India, in South Africa, a lot in Eastern Europe, in the UK, even before I actually moved to Russia. So I had the opportunity to experience different cultures and different styles of management. Ozone, obviously, because that was the first time I was the CEO of a fairly large company. The 3 businesses that I had founded never made it to over $1 billion in sale like Ozone. I wish, but that wasn't the case. So I learned a lot at Ozone. There were a lot of things that needed to be done differently and that I learned to do differently. I think in Russia, the management style, and I'm going to use a lot of cliche, unfortunately, but hopefully not completely far from reality. My view is that Russian style of management tends to be a lot more top-down than American style of management. A lot happens in face-to-face conversation, like the personal relationship matter a tremendous amount in Russia. And to the point where, at least at the time, I would trust an agreement made over dinner way more than I would trust an actual contract. And so this personal relationship really did matter. I think in the US, there is much more of a writing culture where emails and lawyers tend to have the upper hand on a lot of things. At the same time, a much more formal culture in when it comes to business meetings. So business meetings tend to be much more structured and organized around who speaks and who says what, and like casual Friday or casual the way Americans see it, where you could come to a meeting in jeans and hoodie. At the time, I can't imagine doing that, which is good. I love wearing dresses and heels, so I was perfectly in my element in Russia. But so that's very different, and I had to adapt that when I moved to an American company. What is very similar, though, because there's a lot of things that are similar, is Russian companies, at least the one I worked at, Ozone specifically, but a couple of others when I was a consultant for BCG, they tended to be extremely entrepreneurial, very focused on how to solve a problem. I found working with Russian engineers in particular to be like a firework for the brain. The same way I have found that working for American tech companies is a firework for the brain. Russia, and I'm sure some people will disagree with me, but I'm still going to say it, Russia tended to be pretty advanced when it comes to topics around gender equality. I've been asked many, many times if it was a problem to be a female CEO in Russia, and I can honestly say that it was never a problem. And I think that makes it a fairly open world for women, the same way it is in the US in many businesses.
Did you find that hiring in Russia after having worked globally was different? Was there a challenge finding people that had been through growth stories?
So hiring was incredibly difficult in Russia because there was not enough experienced leaders. And in particular, actually, even beyond leaders, there was not enough middle managers. And so you would most of the time just assume that you were taking on people and that you would have to teach them how to become. the middle managers and senior leaders that you needed them to be for the type of high growth company we were trying to build at the time. So that was incredibly challenging, more than anything else. And so diversity was just baked into that whole thing of like, if you want to, again, at the time, I think that has changed, but at the time, if you wanted someone who understand email marketing, that was almost impossible. Like there was probably like 5 people in the entire market that were at the level of experience that we needed at Ozone, because at the time we were already well on our way to become the largest e-commerce company in Russia. And so we needed someone who had like proper skills and proper experience. And that was incredibly hard.
Do you think that gave you really strong muscle memory for what good might look like and, potential for young executives when you came back to the US?
I would say it probably helped recognize potential, because really a lot of what we were doing, especially with the HR director I was working with at the time, was figuring out whether we believed that person had the potential to grow into the position we were handing over to them. Sure. Much more than, they're ready, they're just going to come in with their playbook and just roll it out and take us to the next level. It also forced me to really think about onboarding and development, because again, you would make a bet, like a real bet, like you would assess whether or not that person had a chance, much more than you would judge their behavior and attitude, or hire based on behavior and attitude, much more than you would hire on experience and deliverables. And so then you would have to put in place a proper development program. And that has been tremendously helpful. Not that I know how to do that perfectly, but it is definitely always in the back of my mind. And I think in general, you have a better chance to build an awesome company when you focus first and foremost on recruiting awesome people and helping them be even better by supporting them. I mean, I keep saying businesses are about people first and foremost. And so that experience in Russia forced me to be 100% focused on that, because without that, there would be no business whatsoever.
Your book discusses the lag of investment in Europe and how Booking and Farfetch weren't taken seriously by U.S. investors. And now we have Priceline called to Booking, and Farfetch has a market cap of $14 billion. And Excel and Index and Atomico and many others have raised massive funds for European founders. There are seed funds and A funds like Kindred and the Local Globe that are thriving in London and Europe. Sequoia and Lightspeed have partners in London now. And when I started building that European practice, I always felt like the UK and EU were 5 years behind New York. But I felt like the attention and focus and the money getting put to work there was expanding at a faster clip. What is your thought on the current state of tech in Europe? And how do you feel about that state since you wrote your book?
Honestly, I think you're being very generous when you're saying 5 years. I remember at the time, it didn't even feel like 5 years. It was more like 10 years. It was just like there was nothing. Like raising money was almost impossible. The ecosystem was almost inexistent, especially outside of London. I would say London was a little ahead. I remember a time where my entire network in France was made of people that could not understand how the hell I had decided to be an entrepreneur. That has changed dramatically. And now being an entrepreneur is popular. Like the young generation, at least in the countries that I know, the UK, France, and Germany, they want to be entrepreneurs. The European ecosystem has gotten stronger and stronger. I think in the first half of 2021, I was looking at record $59 billion in funding in just the first half of 2021. It's 20% of the total amount invested globally. It's like 10 to 15% more than even like 2 years ago. So, and as you mentioned, like we're seeing more and more large US funds, Sequoia and Lightspeed being some of them, but there's also General Catalyst and a bunch of others that are now really focused on the European market. There's been some great IPOs. I'm going to be very French here, but like there's been a lot of really great French IPO recently. And so it's all happening everywhere. And so I've seen tremendous change. I do think that Americans thinking about the European market tend to stop at the rigidity of the labor market in many countries, in particular mine, and don't see much further than that. I think that's a fundamental mistake because there is a whole pool of entrepreneurs who are ready, well-educated, lots of really great engineers. There are governments who are very much behind them and really helping. And I know that that probably makes a lot of American cringe a little bit because God forbid the government get involved in anything entrepreneurship related. But I can, if you go to Europe, there are so many amazing startups being built. And I was actually this morning, again, looking at Wired Europe published their hottest startup list this month. And when you look at these companies, they're fantastic. There's so much innovation. And by the way, I'm going to gloat a little, but there's 6 companies in there, which are Techstars companies. So there's so much to do. Forget the cliche about Europe. Just go. There's an amazing ecosystem being built right there.
That's great. Have you, you've said many times that Techstars is the best job you've ever had. Why is that?
Techstars is the best job I've ever had. Are you familiar with the Japanese concept of ikigai?
I am not.
Okay, so it's spelled Ikigai, ikigai. And that's this concept that says that, and I'm going to probably not explain it perfectly well, but this is this idea that the perfect situation for you and in the context of a job, the perfect job for you is a job that is at the intersection of 4 things. It is what you're good at, what you love doing, what the world needs you to do, and what people are ready to pay you for. And so for me, Techstars was exactly that. I love working with entrepreneurs. I've been an entrepreneur myself. And all I do all day long at Techstars is helping entrepreneurs succeed and solving their problem and help them build the next wave of innovation. And so that's fantastic. I want to believe this is what I'm fairly good at, which is scaling a company. Techstars right now is about 400 to 500 investment a year. I believe we can 10x that. And so it's about scaling, and it's actually a very operation-driven focus, which is what I've done at Compass, what I've done at Ozone, and what I've done as a consultant before. And again, I want to believe that I'm actually fairly good at it. This is what the world needs. We have so many challenges in front of us. Humanity has so many challenges in front of it. And I believe that a lot of the solution will come through regulation. If you read my book, you know that. But I also believe that a lot of it will come from innovation. And so when I look at these founders, when I talk to them and they have stars in their eyes and they're changing the world for real, I do think that that's what the world needs. And then, I get paid for it, which is not too bad. I'm a capitalist, so...
Saving humanity and following that thread, you get to see a huge number of companies applying to Techstars. And are you seeing, with everything that's happened over the last couple of years with the pandemic and other things happening in the world, are you seeing founders try and approach these problems? Are you seeing movement in maybe health and wellness, work from home? What other types of things are you seeing that these founders are trying to solve for?
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. We see a lot more companies focused on, I would call it environmental and social impact in general, whether it's climate change, which is top of mind for a lot of people, thanks God, or, companies wanting to help people with social justice, solutions in housing, access to fundamental things that they need to leave. And so, yes, we definitely see a lot more founders doing that. Arguably, Techstars is the biggest startup pipeline in the world because we are operating globally, not just in the US. This year alone, we're going to be operating in 23 countries. And I'm just talking about our accelerator programs. We also have startup weekends, which are run everywhere in the world. And so we see really everything that is happening. What I have observed beyond just the business model, so I've described like specific businesses specifically focused on an ESG related topic. But beyond that, what we see is founders in general being so much more aware, so much more attuned to how can I run a company that has a positive social impact, even if the business model in itself, the product that I'm building, is not related to social impact as such. And so from that perspective, I'm an optimist. On top of being a capitalist, I'm an optimistic capitalist. Let's put it that way. But what I see is a generation of founders who believe deeply that innovation will make the world a better place, to use a sentence that Silicon Valley loves a lot. And that's amazing. And that's why it's the best job in the world for me, because I get to help these people actually make the world a better place.
Have you seen with these founders and the good that they're trying to do? And we always talk about mission-driven businesses here. And so many candidates are compelled by that opportunity. Do you maybe see some of these founders coming to you with businesses where they feel less capitalistic in their mindset and just simply wanting to change the world? And how do you approach those businesses?
So yes, we do. I would say that in general, and I'm not sure everybody's going to agree with me. Actually, maybe even within Techstars. So we'll see how many messages I will get after saying that out loud. But I would say that in general, to change the world, I believe that it's better to play within the system. And so if you want to truly have an impact, actually making money, being profitable, expanding aggressively through fundraising is actually a pretty good way of doing it. It doesn't mean that there is no space for a much more non-profit-like, and I understand it's taking the extremes, but it's not to say that there is not an opportunity to do it that way. My experience has been that true impact usually, or scalable impact, usually comes from companies that are very focused on becoming big. And the way they want to become, the way they become big is because they actually do pay attention to the law of markets and how to raise money and how to spend it and how to make it.
I've always found you to be, incredibly high on the EQ chart on top of IQ. And, I sometimes think some of that is shaped by all of your experiences, obviously, and the BCG experience. On top of that, we hear a lot of clients asking for candidates with that type of consultative experience, BCG, Bain, McKinsey, in their background. What do you think as a consultant really helped make you the executive you are today? And does that experience really shape your EQ, or do you see those consultants moving into operational roles to really be able to learn that?
I learned the hard way through years of coaching and a lot of feedback that IQ was really important, but that EQ played equally, if not more important role. What I learned at BCG and what I am absolutely sure that any candidate coming from a good consulting company and having spent even only a couple of years will usually have is the ability to learn questions, the ability to structure problems in a very fast way so that you can get faster to the solution, the ability to learn about a topic extremely fast, by the way, mainly because you ask a lot of questions and you learn how to ask these questions. So that I consider BCG for me to be my first business family. Like I learned how to think business through BCG. And I will be forever grateful for the 6 years I spent there, because when they hired me, frankly, I didn't even know how to use Excel. And not only that, what I learned is that if you want to do better than the dashboard, the targets that you put in your dashboard, EQ will get you there. IQ won't. IQ will get you to like structure your roadmap and find good targets. But if you want to do better, if you want to go from good to great, to paraphrase someone famous, if you want to go from good to great, it's not IQ, it's EQ. And it's all about people. And as I said earlier, people first, people last. You should be spending all your time on making sure that you have the best people, you help them be the best version of themselves, you take into account all the things that make them individuals, and you deal with problems when they arise that you did not think about capturing in your roadmap and your KPIs. It's all EQ.
As you start to reflect on your years in tech and approaching a couple of decades now, who do you look to as your mentors? How did they help shape you as an executive in your journey?
I've been very, very lucky because I've had many mentors, and I've worked also in environments where mentorship was valued. And so it was considered to be a good thing to be mentoring the next generation. I mean, BCG, and not just BCG, in general, consulting companies are very mentorship driven. The up happens when you have mentors who help you grow. And so I had, half a dozen mentors. I never had an official mentor, but I had a lot of people who went out of their way to help me solve the dozens, if not hundreds of problems that I had throughout my career. Again, starting at BCG with a lot of mentors, actually even before BCG. The very first business I built when I was 16, I had a neighbor coming to me and saying, I don't think you're doing it right, and helping me do things better. My second business was financed by someone who became a mentor and an inspiration to me. And then when I joined Ozone after BCG, I was incredibly fortunate to have the former CEO as a mentor. His name is Bernard Luquet. And then now at Techstars, I'm very fortunate to have like people at the board, like Brad Feld is a board member, like David Cohen, the founder, is the chairman of the board. And these are people, like I talk to them pretty much every day if I want to or if I need to. And they've been incredibly helpful. So I've had, dozens, if not hundreds of mentors, but none of them ever had the mentor title. Maybe I should start thinking about that. Maybe I should distribute mentor titles.
So, before you joined Techstars, you took off a year to write your book. And, as driven as you are, as fantastic of an operator as you are, I always wondered what that experience was like for you, going from the day-to-day leading a large organization, a large operation, a large major online business, to being left with your thoughts to write. Tell me a little bit about that. What was that experience like? And was it harder, easier? What's your take?
If I had known then what I know now, I would never have written that book. It was one of the most excruciating experiences of my life. I must have rewritten that book, 20 times. I stopped counting. I remember by the time I was supposed to send my final manuscript to Wiley, the American publisher I was working with, it was at the point where I couldn't deal with more than 3 pages at once because I couldn't stand the book anymore. I was like, okay, 3 pages and then I'll go for a walk. Just 3 pages. It was really, really hard. And I have a humanities background. I don't have an engineering background. I graduated with a philosophy, history, and foreign language degree. I went to the Sorbonne. And generally speaking, I know how to write, and I actually enjoy writing. It's not a problem. But there's a difference between writing a page here and there and then writing a book that is supposed to make sense. And then if you add on top of that the anxiety, the personal anxiety that I had, which was like, the book is here to stay. Once it's published, I can't change it. And it's a book of opinion. It's a book that talks about regulation and the role of government and the role of boards and of shareholders. And I was I was thinking about that as I was writing the book. And I was like, God forbid I write something really stupid. And 10 years from now, someone finds it. And I'll be so ashamed of having written that thing. And so I think the whole process was painful. And then you had on top of that anxiety. But I'm so happy I did it. So it was a really, really important thing for me to do personally, because I felt very strongly, having spent by then almost 15 years in tech, that this was a message I needed to write. It was almost like I needed to let it out, because I couldn't anymore be comfortable with the way a lot of companies handle problems that impacts humanity and a lot of things that I saw with that ecosystem. And so that was almost like like a therapy. And then, yes, it ended up being a Wall Street Journal bestseller. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm not the only one to find that there's a little problem.
It's a sigh of relief when you find out how well received the book was.
Yes. I can't tell you how many nightmares I had the week before we released the book, where I would wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh my God, that's it. Nobody ever wants to hire me. Nobody wants to talk to me. All my friends have stopped picking up the phone when I call them. And then that's it. They still pick up the phone. It's all good.
Well, it's interesting too, because of the book and, the topic of the book, that you parachuted into Techstars then after that, which seems to be right at the heart at approaching a lot of these things that you discuss.
Yes. And that's why I talked about the Japanese concept of ikigai and why Techstars is the best job I've ever had. Because when they called me, and once I understood a little better where the business was and what was the potential, there was this aha moment when I realized that a lot of what I had talked about in the book about how we should help underrepresented founder get a seat at the table. We should have a different approach to innovation. We should have founders who are educated about the positive top line and bottom line impact of empathy and being human centered. It's not a nonprofit approach. It's like, you're going to make more money if you are more human centered and more empathetic. All of that, I had the opportunity to do it, or try to do it, with Techstars. And not only that, it was a meeting of the mind. I was talking to a lot of the mentors. We have 7,000 mentors. Obviously, I didn't talk to all 7,000 of them, but I talked to dozens of them. And I talked to alumni. We have like 2,500 companies in portfolio, so a lot of alumni. And I was talking to them as I was doing my due diligence on the business. And most of these people, like we spoke the same language, and we had the same ideal around how we can build the largest early stage pre-seed investment business globally, and how we could do that in a way that was sustainable and good for the world. And that's what sold me onto Techstars. And yeah, that was part of the reason why I had written the book. So full circle. I'm very lucky.
All right, Maëlle, it's been wonderful. I really do appreciate you taking all the time today. And I've known you as a candidate. I've known you as a client. And I'm just, in all of that, really happy to know you.
Thanks, Jimmy. It's been a pleasure today. And we've known each other for what? 5 years by now?
Many years.
Yes. So it's been a pleasure today and all over this last 5 years.
Great. Thanks so much, Maëlle.
Thanks for listening to Dare to Be Legendary, brought to you by Diversa Partners. Feel free to check out the show notes for resources that we've mentioned throughout the episode. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, share with friends, and leave us a review. This helps us get content to more listeners like you. Thanks again, and stay tuned for our next episode.